Welcome back, wannabes and creators, to another episode of The Complete Creative, the podcast that helps you build and sustain a better creative business. And today on the show, we have the most successful comic creator you've probably never heard of. Richard Fairgray is an institution in New Zealand where he has produced over 200 comics. And since arriving in America 2 years ago, he's been contracted for 5 books by one publisher, gotten published by another one, had dozens of meetings, and he's just an incredibly prolific and successful creator. And he really got my engine revved when we talked. And I cannot wait for you to hear him as well. Before we get into it, I want to remind you that The Complete Creative has a litany of podcasts, episodes in its archive. It has over 400 blog posts and a whole lot more over at thecompletecreative.com, including a bunch of free courses. And if you want to learn how to build a better creative business, you can do so right now at thecompletecreative.com/FBC. That's FB like in boy, C. All right, now that that's out of the way, let's get on with the show. Take it away, Richard. Tell us what you're passionate about these days.
I am passionate about scaring people with stories. I actually came to this realization last night. I've been passionate about comics for my entire life, passionate about storytelling, all of the obvious things. And last night I had this revelation that I am at my absolute happiness when I see that look on someone's face, not from necessarily telling them the actual story, but just telling them the idea of a story and see them go, ooh, because it create something in their brain that kind of disrupts them a little bit.
This is so interesting because I've been talking a lot recently about kind of finding your voice as a author and finding your zone of genius as an author. Can you talk a little bit about how you came to that realization and like maybe the pieces that that sort of moved together to make you figure that out?
Well, I think I've always spent my life kind of using humor as my defense. And apologizing for existing by producing a lot of work. And since this whole pandemic started, I've had to really rethink like how I'm putting my work out there and kind of reassess like where I'm going to be going next. And so like I find it very easy to come up with stories. I used to make a lot of picture books. I have 11 of them out there and I enjoy doing them, but like it's, I would always say, give me an animal and give me a word and I will write you a 30-page picture book in the next 5 minutes because it became pretty formulaic. And it was sort of work that was fine. And I would always joke that my big goal, like my ongoing joke in my life is that one day I really want to be a ghost. And that is absolutely true, but it's also a good joke. It's true because I really like scaring people. And when I started realizing that I can make stories happen that easily, I started looking at like what would be the stories I wanted to tell. And once we got into lockdown, and I'm taking lockdown incredibly seriously, probably more seriously than a lot of people. But my husband's 74, so I have to be kind of extra careful. I suddenly all these little pieces started like falling into place, and I've been writing a horror series for a couple of years, and I've written a lot of horror in the past. But then I was meant to take a break from this book that I'm doing, Black Sand Beach, and work on this other middle grade thing called Cardboardia. And I couldn't make it work. And just nothing was kind of coming together. And the story is fine. The characters are fine. The idea is, I think, actually pretty good. But I just wasn't engaged with it. And then I had this like little moment of clarity of one tiny moment in a story. If I could drop in a piece of information for the main character to have, the best way to do it would be to have him really scared. And I wrote this, it's like a 3-page scene in the middle of the book where he is awake in the middle of the night and he sees the evil Grey Queen who can travel in and out of our world. And it could have been a big drama action moment, And I realized the best way to do it was just make it really, really scary, just focus entirely on his fear. And suddenly this book that I've been really struggling with for about 7 months all fell into place. And uh, then I started kind of just leaning further into horror. And ever since I was a kid, I used to love those like books of like collections of short horror stories and not scary stories to tell in the dark. I never understood the appeal of those. The stories are kind of cool, but the books themselves are terrible. Um, but like those like here's a story about a guy who goes into a house and gets uncomfortable because there are large cats talking to him. I'm like, well, that's going to mess with my head for years. Or like, here's the opening titles to Erie, Indiana. The kid disappears from the milk carton. And that idea scares me more than the show ever did. And those are the things that last. Stories, comics, they're all disposable. We work in a disposable medium. But actually creating an idea that will stick with someone is just the absolute best. And I think horror is the easiest way to do that because it's about disrupting something that people already hold close. Just take a simple concept and twist it. And so that's where I've ended up.
Has there always been this theme of horror throughout your work? Like when you looked back, did you see that this was the overarching thing, or is it something that like was a little bit of a thread throughout, or like how did you go back and analyze sort of the work that you did to see that this was the thing that you wanted to do now going forward? And also, isn't that moment like just amazing when you're like, I know what I'm going to do. Like, I got it. Like, I have the next 40 years of my life now. I just got to keep doing that thing.
Well, the weird thing is I've always kind of known exactly what I was going to do. Like, I was always going to be doing comics. But yeah, it absolutely is amazing to go, oh, I've unlocked a storytelling method here, and I now know I can now find the scary part in everything. That's why I kind of brought up the picture book thing. I'm so good at the structure of a basic picture book. And by the way, there are some outstanding picture books in the world, and there are a lot of mediocre ones. The kind of 5-minute exercise is geared toward the mediocre ones. But like unlocking that formula, I think now I can take anything simple and turn it into something scary. And that's an exciting like key to turn. Looking back at my old work, I mean, my first published comic was a ghost story. It was a little book called Ghost Ghost. This is back in New Zealand, and it was about a ghost who was sad because he was invisible, so he couldn't scare anyone. This is back when I was 7 years old, and so like he's kind of been there with me all the way through. My wedding ring. My husband and I, our wedding rings are actually little ghosts flying around our fingers. My first, I used to do that thing that I think a lot of little kids do who want to be writers when they grow up and don't know it yet, where they take a bunch of pieces of paper and tape them together, and they're like, I have a book. And then they write a story in it that's entirely defined by how many pieces of paper they've stuck together, not story structure at all. And the first time I ever got in trouble for writing, the first time I got in trouble for drawing was because I drew Postman Pat and Reverend Tim's kissing when I was 4, and my kindergarten teacher did not like it. But the first time I got in trouble for writing was when I was 5, and I taped some pieces of paper together, and I wrote a book called Donald Duck and the Haunted House. And it was all about Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck were meant to go to a haunted house together, and Mickey doesn't show up. And so Donald is sad and lonely and goes into the haunted house and meets a ghost and is so delighted by meeting a ghost. And then the ghost's like, I don't have any friends. And Donald says, I thought I did, but I don't have any friends either. And then Donald shoots himself in the face so he can become a ghost too and stay there forever. So like it's always been there. The underlining thing of everything I do is I don't want to wake up in a world like I never understand people who don't believe in ghosts, because if I woke up every morning with absolute certainty I wasn't going to see a ghost, I would not get out of bed.
I love it. But you said something really important in the beginning, because you were like, I always knew I wanted to make comics. And when people tell that to me, I'm like, cool, you've got about 5% of it now. You've got like, that's good, but like, what do you want to do in comics? Like, what is the theme? What is the thesis statement? Like, what is the thesis statement that someone is going to get when they read your comics? Like, what genre are you going to be in? And then most people are like, well, I just want to make comics. And I'm like, that's a really bad way to build like an audience. It's a really bad way to like build like a career, because when I moved to LA in 2008, I had a very similar thought. It's like, I just wanted to write movies. And my manager at the time was like, what kind of movies? And I was like, I don't know, man, just like movies. And he's like, no, that's not how it works. How it works is every studio has a list, and they're like the top 10 people who write this thing or that thing or that thing or that thing. And you want to be 1, 2, or 3 on one of those lists. Doesn't matter which list it is, but like you want to be in the top 3 in that list, because if you're not in the top 3, they're never going to get to you when they call you. And I thought he was just being a dick. And now 10 years, 15 years on, I'm like, no, it's absolutely true. People think about that when you're writing too. They're like, this is I want a fantasy book, and Russell Nolte makes the best mythological fantasy, and so I'm gonna go there. But every time I venture out of like fantasy, specifically like dark or funny or mythological fantasy, I get creamed, but because like people just are like, oh well, what are you doing? Like that's not the thing that I think of you as. Like you're this thing, and like go back to making this thing. And every time I go back to that thing, like I end up making a killing. And every time I venture out of that thing, it's a very hard slog for me.
It's interesting. I haven't. This is going to sound like a brag, but it's an answer. I haven't found a genre that I haven't made money in yet. Like my fascination has always been story. For about the past 10 years, I've been really trying to figure out an alternate story structure. And I think that that's not about me trying to cause an upheaval of story structure, but I think that, most of the writing on story structure and narratives is focused on, like, let's look at the examples that have existed for all time. And I'm like, there are probably other styles out there that we just, once we apply that lens to it. And so like a lot of it's just been like really exploring the form of comics for me. And I think maybe that's why it's kind of worked. I think also like I work so fast and I've got so much out there. And again, all in New Zealand because I'm new here. But when someone finds one of my books, if they like it, they're probably going to like my style and my humor. And that's kind of running through everything in some way or another. But like, my big book in New Zealand was like a silly little ghost cartoon that ended up running for 10 comics, 10 little mini issues. And then an like action comedy dinosaur crime fighter story, and then like deep introspective, I'm in art school, so I want to explore the nature of power stuff. And it was difficult to have them all sitting side by side, certainly at a convention, but like I definitely had a following for each type. And there wasn't a lot of crossover between the deep introspective stuff and the dinosaur stuff. But if they could bridge the gap to that ghost thing, then it would become like, and now I have to complete the entire set.
Yeah, that's a good point, because like usually I find that if someone likes 2 books, they'll like all the books.
Mm-hmm.
So let's step back for a second, because I have this habit in my show of never actually introducing the person when they start on the show. We just like get into it. So could you take a minute and talk about sort of your career, what led you from New Zealand here, and et cetera, other backstory elements?
Sure. Well, I started publishing comics when I was 7. New Zealand at the time had, I think, 4 comic stores in the entire country. And so I had literally never seen a comic book. I firmly believed that they were a thing that had existed in the past. I knew about them from like, on Ninja Turtles, Michelangelo read comic books. So I knew they had been a thing. But my 7-year-old brain was like, they probably don't need to exist anymore because those are still images. And now we have cartoons that move. So why have comics? And then I thought, so if I started making comics, I'll probably be the only person in the entire world doing it, and I will make millions of dollars. And I liked drawing, and I liked writing stories, and so it just seemed like a good fit. And I made this first little book, and I was blackmailing my school librarian at the time and had access to free photocopying for the next 4 years. So I had 200 copies of this little book made, and I took it to a school athletics day. And I think mostly like just parents who felt sorry for me and stuff bought it. But then they liked it, and I started having people like asking me for more stuff. And when you make $400 in a day as a 7-year old, that means you can buy Megazord and Dragonzord, and that's a pretty big deal to get all at once. That's like more than Christmas and it's in July, so it's a great feeling. And then so I just started kind of churning out these books, and uh, it was just I would just experiment with every stupid idea I could have and turn it into a little short story. But I was always kind of very unsatisfied by those. And I sort of started quietly in the background working on this, the thing every 11-year-old does, the like epic 2,000-page superhero something that changes genre from week to week as your personality grows and shifts. And I ended up working as I was involved in this program to like find high school kids who were funny, and they wheeled us out on stage and made us do stand-up comedy. And I won some competitions, and then ended up doing stand-up semi-professionally through college, and making a little bit of money, but that kind of like enough money when you're in college and you're like, I have $11 for 2 weeks. I'm just going to eat pizzas that are really cheap. And I started doing more and more comic conventions then, and I finished college, and I had my 100th book was just about to come out, and I decided that 100 comics was enough, and now I would have to grow up and get a serious job. And the book was released. It was at all the New Zealand and Australian conventions, and made a pile of money, and then I was facing this like future of becoming a high school teacher because it seemed safe and responsible. And I had never met a happy adult, so I assumed it was okay to be miserable. And I read this thing about the meeting where DC told the Superman artists that they were gonna that Alan Moore was gonna end Superman and they were gonna reboot it. And like how sad it was that these people were going to be fired after doing this amazing thing for so long. But like at least they'd done something amazing. And I was about to become a high school teacher, and I hadn't done a big thing yet in my mind. So I took the money that I made from the last book, and I funded a feature film that I wrote and directed, and we shot over a summer. That was one of the worst ideas I've ever had, because it was a feature film about the comic book industry, which not a lot of people are super into. And I was really lucky. I decided that I would take the first semester of the next year to edit the film, and I'd work as a substitute teacher 4 days a week, and then 3 days a week and nights I would edit. And I get this email from this guy, and he had found my last book on the set of a movie. And that turned into a friendship, that turned into a romance, that turned into me moving to Australia, where he was working on his next movie. And then while on the set of that feature, was the first Wolverine movie. And working as his assistant basically meant making out in his trailer a lot and playing Scrabble. But while I was on set, I met some people, and like they'd heard about this last book I'd done, and in the book there was this fake ad for a kids TV show called Gunnosaurus, just a parody ad. And I started talking at a lunch one day and said, like, obviously this couldn't work as a real thing, but if I changed it to Blastasaurus, there's actually a real story there. It can actually be a real thing, because stupid ideas done well are one of my favorite things. And by the end of that first week, I had 3 of my books optioned. And so I ended up, me and the guy broke up because I found out he was secretly married. And I ended up going back to New Zealand, but I thought, like, it wasn't so much that a big good thing had happened. There wasn't a lot of money. There wasn't a lot of like real potential for things to go anywhere fast. But it was the first time I thought, oh, I can actually do this. Someone outside, like, it's very easy to sell books at a convention, but it's also very easy to come away from that and be like, did they like my book, or did I just charm them somehow? Did I trick them? That whole imposter syndrome, like, oh no, they're going to go home and feel like they wasted their $4. Um, but this was the first time that people who had no interest in me and had no interest in the story itself looked at it and said, this could be profitable. We want to put money into it. And that was when I never started teaching technically. And I just kind of poured everything into comics from that point forward. And I went from doing 6 conventions a year to doing about 20, and made a pretty comfortable living. And I was kind of the only game in town. Like, there's a New Zealand comic scene, but at the conventions they had a table for all of them, and it was like a free space, and anyone could kind of be part of it. And uh, there's no judgment from me on that. Like, if you want to make comics for a hobby, awesome. If you want to make, if you don't care about selling at conventions, awesome. I do. I want to do this full time, and so I became like the only game in town. And then by the time I was 30, I had 200 books and an action figure and 2 mobile apps and a giant like a 20-foot by 30-foot screen at my booth that was 60 feet wide and 20 feet deep and had like a private lounge for my staff. And like we were we were in talks to work with different city councils to have my characters be the mascots of big public events. And I just looked around and I thought, I can't do anything else. Like, there are still only 4 comic stores, and everyone here knows who I am. And I've been doing Blastasaurus now for almost 8 years, and it can keep doing well, but it can never get any bigger. And I just hated it. So the next day I brought everything I owned into the convention with me. And every book that sold, I dropped the price of every book to $1. And every book that sold came with a free personal item, or a page of original art. And I left the convention, and all I had left was a big plastic tub, and my plastic skeleton, Nigel, is my best friend, 6 pairs of shoes, 4 pairs of underwear, 8 t-shirts, and $30,000 in cash. And I went to the airport, and I flew here. And then I lived in a recording studio, and got an office on my first day. And I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do, but my plan is I've got to do something new and bigger. And I was quite jet lagged, and so I don't remember this part happening. But all I know is that within 48 hours of arriving here, I'd been to a Tegan and Sarah concert that I slept through but filmed, and been offered a publishing deal by a small publisher that I had apparently agreed to. And so then my plan of like wandering around and learning about the place was thrown out the window, and I was, by the 3rd day, working full-time on Blastasaurus again. And these past 2 years have just been like a very kind of slow build toward finding, like, you know, what will be the big launch, you know, how will everyone get to know about this? And now, because of the pandemic, like, I had a book that was meant to launch in May, and it is available. It's, you know, it's online everywhere, but I was going to go on a 3-month tour for it. And there was going to be like a huge publicity wave about that. And now that's kind of gone, and it feels that's a surreal feeling. But so that's where I am now. That's who I am, and that's what I've done.
How the hell did you draw 30 books a year?
Oh, I'm just fast.
Like, is there anything that you did to develop that ability to draw so fast? Because that seems like at least double what a normal human could produce given the same time frame.
Yeah, but I think that most people don't. they talk about introverts and extroverts, whether you're powered by people or being alone. I'm actually powered by the excitement of working. Um, I can work in, like, if you said to me, "Hey Richard, here's a page of a comic." It's pretty simple, because it's just some reaction shots. It's 9 panels, basic cartoonish faces, no backgrounds. I would say, cool. That's probably going to take me 2 days to draw, um, because I will be so bored. But like this morning, I'm in my office now, and I've been here since 6 a.m. Because I got up to walk to take my dog out to pee, and I thought, oh, I might as well just go straight to work. And I'm working on a cover for this new book of ghost stories, that I wrote last week, and it's um, hundreds of frogs bouncing in toward a lighthouse, out of the ocean, and every frog is covered in intricate patterns, and the ocean is sort of drawn like an um, uh, old timey book drawing, that kind of woodcut kind of ocean thing. And it's probably going to take me another. I've penciled it, but it's probably going to take me another 11 hours to ink. But then once that's done, that'll only be like 9 p.m. And then I've got a few more things to write tonight. But like, what else would I do? I can talk to people while I work. I can play with my dog while I work. I can I can do an interview while I'm drawing those patterns. And yeah, the harder something is to do, the faster I will get it done, is what I've had to learn.
It's fascinating. Could you talk a little bit more about like how your workday looks, or is it all different all the time?
Um, I mean, everything's different all the time now because of the lockdown and the curfews and the protests and the everything. And I'm in the process of trying to like get out of America as quickly as possible. But my norm, I mean, okay, I'll tell you a story. I have never read a contract in my life, which is just great business advice. Um, I've always just assumed it'll work out well, and many times it hasn't. I did almost lose my house. I did have to do a lot of work really fast for some places I didn't want to work for to cover some legal bills to get the rights to Blastasaurus back from someone once. Um, and I haven't learned my lesson, because I went in for a meeting, with this publisher. I was on my honeymoon in New York, and I got asked by an old editor of mine to come in for a meeting, and she wouldn't tell me anything except to have an idea for a series. And I didn't have anything because I was in the middle of I just gotten married, and I built a haunted house for my wedding, so it kind of like really consumed a full month. And so I get there and I walk in, and we catch up, and while we're catching up, I'm just furiously trying to like run through my brain for a series, and I start talking about this haunted lighthouse that I used to spend my summers at when I was a kid. And I then make up a fictionalized version of myself, throw in my best friend, name a couple of other characters after my dogs, and then just start and I'm very good at making up something and pretending like I've been working on it for a really long time, because the brainstorming process of the connecting dots when someone asks a question, oh, and what would this thing be in that world? It's pretty easy to come up with an answer, and then you just build that tapestry. So I pitched this thing, and I said I'd like it to be 3 64-page graphic novels to start, because I think I can tell that first part of the story in that. And she said, okay, yeah, and they made me an offer in the room, but the offer was for my page rate and a time frame for it. The term sheet came through. I checked. Yes, they were going to meet my page rate, and yes, the first book was not due until the 1st of May, and I was meant to start at 1st of January. And the sad thing was they only wanted 2 books. So I thought, okay, that's fine. I can condense the story a little bit. Started tweaking it, and signed the contract. And then my editor calls me on like the 6th of January, and she says, "Hey, I was hoping I might have had something from you by now, because I know the time frame's pretty tight." I was like, "It's a 64-page book in 4 months. Like, what are you talking about? We're fine. And she said, no, it's not. We want 2 books, each containing 3 64-page stories. And I went, oh, cool. No, I definitely knew that. And so it thrilled me. Like, there was nothing, I was a little concerned, I'll be honest, but like, it thrilled me. So I moved into my office full time. I love where I work. It's a weird old building, and I can order my food in. I bought a pillow and a blanket for my couch, and I ordered 20,000 premium adult body wipes from a discount website, so that I wouldn't have to go home and shower. Long story short, I do have 2 permanent chemical burns from those discount body wipes, so I don't recommend that part. But basically, it meant that my day was 3 hours of sleep from midnight till 3 a.m., and then an hour and a half nap in the afternoon. And the rest of the time was nothing but work, because I knew that I had no other choice. And I went a little bit mad, and I ate a lot of terrible food, and there was literally a 6-week period where I didn't leave the building. And when people hear about it, they say, oh my God, that's awful. How do you work like that? And I'm like, no, I'm telling a story about the favorite time of my entire life. That was the best. Like, I'm at a slumber party with my characters forever. So that's what my best work days look like that. If I'm trying to have a more balanced life, I will usually get up at 5. I have a little not outdoor, but like the garage that I converted into a haunted house for the wedding, I've now set up as a writing studio, and so I have all the long story, but my plastic skeleton Nigel, who was my best man, did have a plot to kill us and replace us with poorly constructed felt humans grown from sunflowers. So the whole place is filled with sunflowers and skeletons and human skin suits, and it's all very brightly colored and like creepy blue lights and monkey lamps. And I'll work out there for a couple of hours until it gets a little too overwhelmingly cold, and then come in the house, draw all day while my husband just potters around and does his thing and checks in to make sure that I'm not going to die or whatever. I'll try and take an hour off in the middle of the day, but it depends how excited I am. I'm struggling at the moment because I'm leaving America in 6 days. I'm having to spend a lot of my time like having a farewell drink at social distance in my front yard with all my friends one at a time. And like last night, I was meant to spend the evening having whiskey with my best friend here, and one of my best friends in the world for a long time. And I had just cracked an idea when I realized I had to go home and do that. And the whole night, I was like, I just want to be back at the office. I want to be back working. And then, of course, like in any normal situation, I would have just had some drinks and at midnight or whatever walked back to the office and worked all night. But of course, there's a curfew, and oh boy, those police are taking it seriously. I had someone leave my house 10 minutes after the curfew because they'd ridden their bike there, and then their sister came and picked them up, and they got like 2 blocks from my house. They got pulled over and pulled out of the car by the cops and had their face mask stripped off them. So right now I can't work the way I want to, and it's driving me a little nuts.
I'm just sitting over here thinking about what I would do if I had to work for 21 hours a day. How do you keep the balance between you and your husband while you're working so much? Or does that just like you say, hey, this was part and parcel, honey?
Yeah, I think he always knew what he was getting into. We're lucky for a couple of reasons. One, we have never lived in the same country. We've been traveling back and forth for the 4 years we've been together. And we met in New Zealand when he was there judging a dog show, and I was back for 5 days for a convention while I was in the middle of moving to LA. And so we have like, it's always been normal for our relationship to be mostly telephone based. And he also is, he's not interested in comics at all. He's very interested in my comics because I do them, but it's really nice that that he's just delighted that I'm doing them, and doesn't feel like left out or forgotten, as long as I can remember to like look up every few hours and spend 10 minutes actually engaged. I don't know. We'll see how it moves forward. From next week, we'll be living together full time for the first time ever. I mean, we've done a couple of months here. Like usually it's like 1 month on, 2 weeks off. But like this will be the first time that I'm, since I've known him, not in a big exciting city and not at a distance of a few thousand miles.
That's interesting because my wife and I are we have traditionally not spent a lot of time in the same place. Like we have occupied the same place, but I'm usually at a convention or preparing for a convention. And then when she gets off work, I'm like exhausted from work as well. And on the weekends, I'm gone. So we had wondered, like, well, what will happen if we live together? If we just like now we just like have nothing but time to like no going out. Like at night, we're in the same place, and I've been, knock on wood, like we're like, oh no, I still want to hang out with you even like months later. This is nice because I was not sure if after like if our 15-year, almost 20-year relationship was is because like she was working hard and then I was working hard, and then like we would only see each other like for a couple of hours and then go to bed at night, or if like it was a thing that we would still like each other when we had nothing else to do.
I mean, don't keep us in suspense. Do you still like each other?
Yeah, we do. Like
Okay.
it's great. It's like we were just talking about this together, and I was like, oh, I'm so glad that like we still like you after like months spending together. And I was like, I don't like me after months spending together, so like thank you for like that. I don't know what like special breed you have to put up with me, but like thank you for that because I can barely do it on a daily basis.
Well, it's also that like right now, we obviously all have no choice, and so that it becomes like a very different thing than like, would you want to do that if you could leave the house and you were making the choice to stay home all of the time? That would feel very different than this kind of like, oh, we're actually in this together. We are experiencing. My friend Lily and I have this concept called miserable fun, and it's based on we were at this terrible convention, and she was working for me, and it was just a badly organized show. There were like 500 attendees. It was in the basement of this hotel, and there were literally like 30-minute periods where no one would even walk past. And she said to me, "Hey, Richard, did you ever see the pilot episode of The X-Files when everyone lost 9 minutes?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course." And she says, "Well, I think I know where all of those 9 minutes went. We are experiencing all of them for the entire world right now." And I was like, "Yeah, isn't it terrible?" And she said, "Yeah, and I cannot wait to tell people about it afterwards." And that's what this pandemic is. Like, it is awful, but it's miserable fun because we are delighted for the stories we will have.
I like that. That's such a hopeful note. And I want to, we have to work towards wrapping up now, but I don't know how you're going to condense the things that you work on into like this final segment that we do about like your work. But yeah, the floor is yours. Like, what project are you focusing on? What project would you like us to focus on? What project would you like to talk about?
Well, it's weird. Everything like has so quickly become all about one thing for me. My book Black Sand Beach is like my favorite thing I've ever done. It's the book I'm obsessed with. It's the book that I lived in the office to do. It's a middle grade horror graphic novel series. My publisher just acquired a third and fourth book in the series. The first book came out, I think, 3 weeks ago. It is about a boy named Dash and his best friend Lily, who are stuck for the summer at Dash's father's poorly constructed beach house that he and his sister built. And there is a lighthouse that is haunted, and a lot of other creepy stuff going on there as well. But Dash hasn't been there for 6 years, and for some reason there is a voice that's whispering to him from the lighthouse that hasn't worked for 100 years, telling him it's happy that he's come back because it knew they had a connection. And it's kind of this. It's one of the scariest things I've ever worked on, and it's just the best book I've ever done. I'm so proud of it. It's through Pixel and Ink Books, and it's available everywhere. And when the pandemic started, we decided that we had some free time, or we didn't want to be bored. So my roommate and I, and two friends of ours, I wrote six episodes of a short horror podcast called Tales from Black Sand Beach that ties into it, just to build out the scary world. And so that's the series is finished now. It's all online. So all 6 episodes of that are out there. And my publisher said they want to turn the podcast into a book. And I said, cool, because I've always wanted to do a book of short horror stories. And so last week I wrote 13 short stories did a couple of illustrations for each one. And I think the ebook of Black Sand Beach is coming out in July, and the first 2 or 3 of those 13 stories will be included with that, and then the full book will be out next January. And then the second book in Black Sand Beach will be out in May. So it's at very least for the foreseeable future, that'll be my big thing. If you're an adult who wants to read an adult memoir, rather than read a children's horror story, then look me up and look up my website, Richard Sucks, where I've just finished my 7-part memoir comic called Octopus. And Blastasaurus is still available. It's sort of on hiatus, or officially ending, I guess, ending for now because of COVID. But 9 issues, 2 specials, and 2 free comic book day issues, and a Halloween Comic Fest issue are out there through Golden Apple Books on their website or at their store, or once conventions start.
You've worked with so many publishers. Do you have any sort of like overarching things to expect from a publisher, or a thing that you've learned that you could tell the people who are listening, who are a lot of writers or other people who want to write books, that you've learned about working with publishers over the years?
I've learned the hard way to not. It's very easy to talk yourself out of money when you work in comics. It's very easy to say, "Oh, I probably don't. Well, I'm just drawing silly pictures, so please pay me less." I think everyone has that in their subconscious, and what it does is it means that the publisher will pay other creators more, and 2, even if your book is their highest selling book, they will not value you as much because they're not pouring as much money into it, and they will think of you as the easy one to deal with, and then your book gets lost in the shuffle, which is really disappointing to see. I would also, there is such an idea out there that there is one path into comics, and that is like, when I first moved to LA, I had a lot of meetings with managers and things, and all of them would say to me, they all ask me the same question. They would say, what Batman story would you, everyone has a Batman story they want to tell. What's yours? And my answer was, I don't. Like, I have no interest. And everyone's sort of expected to want to write for DC or Marvel, and everyone's like holding on to this special thing they're saving for it, or they're working toward that. I have made a living in comics now for, an adult grown-up big person living for 12 years, and I paid my way through college and high school, and I definitely had plenty of money to throw around on stupid things when I was a kid. From comics, and I've done that without ever submitting anything to any publisher. I have done that by there's a lot of articles out there that'll say, like, here's how writers really make their living. And if I had seen those articles when I was a kid, I might have said, oh, I guess I can't make a living as a writer. I better find something else to do. But I never knew that, and so I just kind of ran headfirst into it and did whatever I had to do to make it work, and it did.
It's beautiful, because I had a similar experience where, like, I had known a lot about movies and TV, but I didn't know anything about comics when I started doing comics. And like, if people had told me how hard it was to make a living in comics, I would have never bothered, because like, it's hard. It would be too hard. But because I didn't know better, I just did it, and I was like, well, I'm gonna make this book, and it's gonna be awesome, and then like whatever's gonna happen is gonna happen at the end of the day.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, you have to be good at it if it's going to work. But I think like that, just don't stop. Don't have a plan B. Don't stop and question whether or not it's going to work. Every job that I have has been like I have been approached by publishers and offered things. And that's, it's a weird industry because like when those numbers do come out, like I'm unknown in America, and according to all of the metrics online that have been coming out in the past year or so, I'm technically in the top like 5% for page rate and advances for books. And it's like, but I'm here without anyone knowing who I am yet. Where do I build to? That's the scary part. And that's because comics for most people are a jumping off point for TV or film. And every time someone says, "Oh, your comics could be a TV show or a film pretty easily. You want to work toward that?" I'm like, "Nah, you can if you want. Like, here they are. Here's the book. Here's all the information. Go make a TV show if you like, but that's not what I'm here to do. I chose comic books because I like them the most, not because I like money the most."
I love it. All right. So one more time, let people know where they can find you, and then we'll say goodbye.
All right. On Twitter, I'm at Blastasaurus, Blastosaurus. Instagram at Richard Fairgray author. RichardSucks.com. That sucks with an X for my more grown-up stuff. RichardFairgray.com. I'm the only Richard Fairgray in the entire world. So if you look up that name, you'll find me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for stopping by, Richard. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for having me.
So that was my interview with Richard Fairgray. He is just a font of knowledge, and like my heart was palpitating just listening to what his schedule was like. But I hope you got a lot out of this. If you did, go and check out Richard's work. He sure has a whole lot of it. And make sure to go over to thecompletecreative.com, check out our podcast archives, our epic blog posts, free courses, and a whole lot more. Finally, please do not forget to rate, review, and subscribe so you can make sure you keep getting these podcasts in your podcast player every week. That's it for me. Have a great day.